Can you hear us, Kevin?
Yeah, it's up. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, can everybody still hear me? Kevin? Yeah, I'm trying to, we lost the mouse for the main computer, so I'm having to use two computers, one to run the Zoom meeting and one to share my screen, so bear with me, I might get a little confused. Well, I'm trying to do all this. So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, got our quorum plus Kevin.
What is it today?
100. It'll be fun.
I got the last 2 days. It wasn't terrible.
Salt Lake yesterday.
It was one freak. I can't wait to hear about it.
Amazing.
Okay, it's 1:05 PM on Friday, September 9th, 2022, and I call the Grant County Budget Advisory Board meeting to order. Board members present are Chris Baird, Zachary Chesak, Mary McGann, Angela Book, and Kevin Walker. I'm not sure who Kay Weston is on the Zoom. And, let's see, our first action item is the election of the chair, vice chair, and secretary. Anybody have a motion?
Do we have to elect people first or?
Well, that would be the motion to elect the.
We can either do it one at a time, or you can just wait one motion for all three.
I forgot.
So I'm normally the chair, and
Aye.
then the vice chair
Kind of
normally
varies, yeah.
never does anything, because if I can't make the meeting, the meeting.
Yeah. I think when I was vice chair, there was one meeting that I had to like halfway run for maybe 20 minutes, but nothing too bad.
So yeah, I just need a nomination, a motion to.
What does the secretary do?
Nothing usually, but
Usually.
Yeah, that's it.
it depends on whether we could talk the commission admin office into doing minutes for us. If not, then somebody might have to do the minutes.
But that's not me. I'm terrible. at it.
So if, but
And-
I would be stepping down and hopefully Renee would be stepping in. So if I do that, then I would be giving those duties to Renee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that could be.
So what do you want?
So it's okay.
It's fine.
So I make a motion to nominate Chris Baird for chair, Zach, oh, you can't.
I'll be voting, yeah, I'll be heading out.
Heading out.
So would it be,
Would,
would it be better to do
Shaylee, would you be?
action item 2 first?
Well, she's not on the board yet.
Yeah.
We still have so right now we have,
What about switching 2 and 1?
Yeah, that's-
yeah, the options are myself, Mary, Kevin, Gabe.
we'll do
Well, then
first
I
call.
will nominate Chris Baird as chair, myself as vice chair, and Renee as secretary.
Renee's not on the board
Angie
yet.
is
so-
secretary.
Angie.
So it'd have to be me.
Got it.
So it has to
That's
be
it.
Angie, and then the next meeting we can fix it, change it over. Okay, so the motion is to nominate Chris Baird as chair, Mary McGann as vice chair, and Angela Book as secretary.
Do
Is
we
there a
need a
second?
second?
Second by Zach. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, Okay, motion passes 5-0.
So does that mean that I'm now in charge of doing minutes for this?
We'll see.
Okay. It's recorded though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have something to refer back to.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Next up, we've got interview and recommendation of candidates for board vacancies. So I guess I'll start off with the easier one, Renee, because you're the only one that's up for the department head position. So I'll just, I guess the question would be, tell us what your qualifications are for the budget advisory board and why you want to be involved.
Sure. So for everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Renee Baker. I'm the HR director for Grand County. So I handle all of the HR functions for the county, including salary and payroll and benefit administration. So I guess that's my qualification. I generally sit on these meetings either way throughout the year. So just being able to be part of the process this year officially.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Renee? All right, we'll move on to the citizen position. Let's
I
see,
do.
so I just asked the same questions of you two. We'll try to make it relatively easy. Unfortunately, I only have one position, so I'll have to make a decision between the two of you.
That's okay. I mean, we work together, so.
Okay.
We knew we were both coming, so. Well, I've been in finance for 17 years. I have run my own financial advising business for the last 8, which then requires me to build budgets and business planning and being able to really weigh and look at different options within financial budgets. So I also live in the county and feel like I have a good opinion as to looking at the budgets. I have been on the board of the chamber for the last 3 years. I'm currently the vice president of the chamber. So that may be a good segue of being able to talk to both heads of the departments and being able to communicate that information and being able to bring what I know from the chamber here and what I know from here to the chamber.
Candace, want to go next?
Sure. I, for the last 19 years, have worked at Wells Fargo in the business wholesale, the banking department. We did business accounts along with loans. So I'm very familiar with business, financial statements, budgets, cash flow. And then on the banking side, obviously, like the easy stuff, the checking and savings. And another thing that we did a lot of at Wells was refinance bonds for municipalities. So I don't know the ins and outs of that. I've been with Edward Jones since March. And so I'm currently in the process of being a financial advisor at Chaley.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? All right, we have a motion then on the recommendation to the commission. At this point, we're just recommending. We're not actually appointing. We'll make a recommendation to the commission for the department head position and the citizen position.
If you guys want to talk about that without us here, we're happy to leave.
You.
So there's only one seat available and we have to choose between the two of them.
Yes.
Really, either
I mean,
way
we
does
don't
not
like,
hurt. We
yeah.
talked about it and
We're
Yeah.
trying to get involved in the county in multiple ways. So like,
Yeah.
we're,
So either way, just one of you want to be on it.
yes, we would love that. But we don't care.
Well,
It's whoever you guys want, and I'm happy to defer to her. I am on several boards, but I can
I
always.
definitely
relay
probably
the
have more
chamber.
Time.
I was just gonna ask. yeah.
that's what I was gonna say. It
That's what I was
sounds like
just
you
gonna
might
ask
have
too,
more
yeah.
She
time.
does.
Yeah.
But you having the ins to the city also is a little appealing. But this is time consuming.
It's time consuming for
Mhm.
about a month.
About a month, yeah.
And it's not like other boards that is time consuming.
But I'm always happy to share my intel with her, or it really doesn't matter to either of us. That's why we said we just want a good poll.
But you're on the chamber, see that's a real
Mhm.
asset because sometimes there's a disconnect between the business and the county.
Often. Often.
So,
But
so that's really appealing too.
How do you feel about that, Chris? Do you weigh either way?
having a close connection to the chamber is good, but it is a kind of time consuming. You know, do you feel like you would be able to attend, you know, most or all of the meetings?
From what you told me, I mean, I told you my conflicts from the schedule. So I am always available by Zoom, like very rarely does that not happen. But it's just, you know, we're working on getting her as a financial advisor, so I feel like she would be just as effective on the board and have just as much insight. And if time is an issue and that would be better for her, then I can always, we can communicate within our office to make sure that you guys have the information from the chamber and vice versa, in hopes that we would kind of connect that. I don't know if they would even approve an alternate, but maybe like having one of us on it and the other as an alternate, or if. 'cause then we're
Yeah, I mean,
kinda
the
getting
bylaws
to
have set up that.
Yeah.
So it would have to be one person, and, you know, I don't necessarily expect everybody to attend every single meeting.
Right.
I know that some people are gonna, you know, be able to make, or miss a few here and there. But it's really only a major commitment for a couple months.
That's from about now until.
The end of October, and there might be some meetings in November. Sometimes we do some joint meetings with the commission. So the process is that state code requires that we produce and recommend a budget for amended budget for 2022 and a full new budget for 2023 by the first week in November. So that's the deadline, and it's statutory, so we have to, there's no leeway.
Right.
So we'll get that done. Once we present the tentative budget to the commission, then it kind of switches over to the commission takes over and starts, you know, tweaking it however they want. And so it's a little weird in county government because the commission plays both an executive and legislative role. They've delegated the majority of the executive component of budget creation to this board, which is, you know, we produce the tentative budget, and that's the executive side. And then when it goes to the commission, they put on their legislative hat. And, you know, as is the case in government all across the US, the legislature actually makes the decision on the budget, or the executive branch produces it.
And what's the term? Like, is it just 1 year term, or like how, like what's the executive?
I think it's 2 years.
It's 2 years, yeah.
But, and you can do 2 terms of 2 years. And then get term limited out. That's the position that Zach's in right now.
Oh, like you.
I've been the one and only citizen since the start, so I think Nate's trying to get it up. Oh gosh, which mouse is it?
Yeah, I wish we could do an alternate, because it's always nice to have an alternate. Then one person can't make it, the other person can, and they can, maybe we should look at amending our bylaws to allow that to happen. That's
At least for
something
the,
in the future.
yeah.
In the future, because that's what I would recommend if we could do that. But I am really excited about somebody being on the chamber, because we've had a lot of,
I've been privy to a lot of that disconnect.
yeah,
so
there's been
I
a lot of
understand.
disconnect, and it's really been painful on both sides. And for a couple of years, if we could have somebody that could maybe at the chamber, you know, be able to express what is going on better. Would be great stuff. So I would make a motion to have Shaylee Bryant as a citizen.
Okay.
Advisory member.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Okay, call the vote. All in favor? Aye. And then we got Kevin is an aye, and Gabe, I think, is on, right? Are you on, Gabe? Can you hear us?
Such a benefit. I think
Just
it's
open
so
that
hard.
communication up.
All right, I'm gonna call it
So hard to share.
5-0 with Gabe. Doesn't appear to be voting yet.
Up, can you hear me now?
If I can hear you now. How do you?
All right, so I vote yes, thank you.
Aye,
So that's-
yeah.
6-0, approving the recommendation for Shaylee Bryant. So we'll pass that along and the commission will consider this on the 20th.
Sounds good.
Okay, you're free to stick around, both of you, if you want.
Learn how the process.
We're gonna
goes.
go over, today we're going over
Revenues.
the main revenue sources.
Which has to be somewhere at 2, but I have probably 20 minutes.
But, you know, I think we're not gonna go to the 5 today, but you can stick around, feel free to stick around if you want, however long you'd like to.
Thank you both.
We're excited just to help Pat out.
Thank you. The most.
She can thank me later
Perfect.
with a
Okay.
beer, I mean, like. Going golfing later.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, that sounded weird, sorry.
All right, so the next action item is approval of the minutes from our last meeting last year. It's kind of always the case that last meeting hangs out there until the next year rolls around. And so we've got the minutes that I sent out via email for November 1st, 2021. Does anybody have any corrections or a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from November 1st, 2021.
Okay, Mary makes the motion to approve. Does anybody second?
I'll second it.
Angie seconds. Any corrections or discussion? Okay, I'll call the motion. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
All right,
Aye.
passes 6-0. All right. Now we're gonna move into the revenue projections. I'm gonna share a couple different ways of looking at things. This is my main spreadsheet that I use to track sales tax revenue. So we've got transient room tax, our county's approved, voter approved optional transportation tax. The county option tax is 1/4% sales tax. We've got the, again, another voter approved tax, the rural healthcare tax, which funds long-term care center at EMS. As well as the dish payment for MRH, usually anyway. We've got a restaurant tax. The general sales tax, which the county and city split. And then car rental tax, which is composed of 2 car rental taxes and an OHV tax.
So Chris, I know you've got a lot on your plate, but one thing I think would also be useful to see is just some pie charts showing the various sizes of these different, like, the restaurant tax is pretty small compared to some of the others, for example. So not all of these graphs are equally important.
That's
So-
true. And yeah, we can kind of look at, I mean, I'll in another instance, I'll create a pie chart. But you can kind of estimate it here, looking at the dollar figures are on the left, this axis that's running in the y-axis. And then the x-axis are months. So looking at these, just to explain these graphs, the blue line is essentially a trend that's established usually from 2012 to 2019. They're not exactly perfect because some of these taxes are have had percentage increases through the years, and that's not growth per se, but it's obviously an increase in the tax. And then there's other circumstances where some of the taxes came on later than others. But essentially what this trend line is doing, and it's tracking it month by month, but for instance, if we look at the TRT total here, you can see 2012 through 2019, there's a pretty gradual slope across all of these. And what the trend line, essentially is doing is drawing a straight line as close as possible, hitting all of these, and then projecting out to 2020, 2021, and 2022. And the reason, for producing these graphs, because 2020 and 2021 were outliers. 2020, was a year of COVID closures, and so taxes were very low. 2021 had a big rebound and very high, probably the record-setting year of all time, at least going back to the 1990s, where I have records. And so looking at this blue line, more or less establishes average growth. And so the yellow or the orange line are the actual collections. So you can see in 2020, this blue line is what we would expect given average growth across 2020. And then the orange line is what actually happened. So you can see very, very low collections in TRT until about September of 2020, then it crossed back over and became a little above average. 2021 was generally above average through the entire year, except for July, which I attribute to the fire, the big fire up on the mountain. And other fires also around that just made everything very smoky. And then here's 2022 for our TRT. Through April, we were above average. April, for whatever reason, was way above average. And then we crossed over to being slightly below average for May and June in TRT. And over here, this graph right here is showing total TRT collection. So this gives you an idea of how the TRT is growing over the years as a visual reference. These are also totals. You've got 2020 where you can see, that the total collections in 2020 were well below the average trend. 2021, well above. And then in 2022, we're still sitting above average year to date, about 17.8% above average. However, if the trend continues that we're seeing in May and June, that number's going to creep down closer to being average probably by the end of the year. And so, this is significantly
When you
different.
when you say average, that's on trend, so that would still be an increase over 2021, right? Or
No,
what?
not 2021.
Okay,
No.
it would be,
It would be an increase relative to
average means average.
2019. So yeah, we just have to understand that
2019 was that.
2021 is very high, and it's going to end up being, I'd say, at least 15% less than 2021.
Yeah, sorry, I misspoke, but average means still growing, but growing at an average rate.
So that average is established from 2012 through 2019.
Yeah.
Those are the trends, that we're working against, and that's, a way of establishing, let's say COVID never happened. And we continue to grow. How would we expect, these taxes to be coming in? Then we can kind of roll across all the different taxes. Transportation tax, a little bit more hit and miss. It's running well under average for 2022.
In transportation tax, that's not taxing things that are related to transportation. It's like a general sales tax earmarked.
It is a general sales tax, and it is applicable to all transactions except groceries, unprepared food. Same with this county option tax, except this tax, I believe both this tax and the other general sales tax that the city assesses are applied to groceries. The groceries have a 3% tax on them, and these two are a component of that. So that's why they track somewhat different than the other sales taxes. These general sales taxes are running pretty strong. They're well above average all across 2021 and above average also in 2022, quite high. Inflation, I think, plays a role in that, but not entirely. We're looking at between 6 and 9% inflation over the last year, depending on which month you're talking about. And this tax year to date is up 29.39%. So performing better, obviously, than the TRT. Some of these others. This rural healthcare tax is likewise applicable to all transactions except for groceries. And like the other transportation tax has been, was above average through April and then switched over to being below average for May and June. The restaurant tax, slightly above average in the first quarter, popped way up in April, then went below average in May, and then popped back up way above average for June. So.
All over the board, isn't it?
Yeah, that one's, fairly variable, and I'm not entirely sure what
what affects it, you know, to be up and down so much. One thing that I've noticed, you can kind of see this blue line is established, you know, based on averages from 2012 to 2019, and there's not really a big bump in June in those averages, but for the last couple of years there has been. So for some reason, June's seen a big bump in restaurant tax, which isn't reflected in historical collection. Okay, got it right here.
I gotta go. I'm gonna go back to meetings. Thank you, everybody, for the past
Thank
couple of
you.
years.
Thank
It's
you,
been
guys.
fun. Maybe I'll jump on the Zooms every once in a while.
Yeah.
Show my face. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then likewise, you know, we've got this other sales tax, which is applicable to basically all transactions, including unprepared food. And again, running pretty strong. Inflation plays a role in it, but I don't think it's, you know, the whole picture by any means. So we're definitely seeing growth in that one. The car rental tax was way above average through April, then dropped below average in May, then bounced back up in June. So again, similar to the restaurant tax in the way it's performing, a little, you know, unpredictable, but still doing reasonably well. Then in the end here, we've got all the taxes combined. Again, running above average through April, crossed a little bit below average in May, and then bounced back slightly above average for June. And this is across all the taxes. So I've actually used these figures to project revenues running into at least through the end of 2022. And I guess it's kind of the point of discussion that we might have about how we want to project growth, if we want to project any growth at all running into 2023. At this point, oops, let's see, back up. At this point, I haven't projected any growth beyond what I'm projecting the end of 2022. Part of the reason why we're down in our TRT projections relative to what we initially budgeted was because I predicted that we would stay at least, you know, the same as 2021, but it appears now that we're going to be less than that, and significantly less, enough that it's about $850,000 difference. And so, you know, I wasn't conservative enough, even though we've never crossed the threshold of 0% growth before, except for in 2020 due to COVID. So in a year without, you know, COVID closures, we've never crossed that threshold, but we almost certainly are this time. So I'm just going to kind of bounce through real quick these. So that we're in the general fund right now. And this first category of revenue, it's taxes in the general fund. I'm just going to go through some of these real quick. What I like to do in the beginning of the budgeting process is to plug in revenue, even if I'm going to come back and revise it many times over throughout this process. And the reason I like to do that is because it gives me a baseline of what we have to work with. And so as we start to populate the expense side, we start to get closer and closer to having a bottom line. And so, you know, it's useful to try to get, you know, from the beginning to get an estimate of what we have to work with from the get-go as soon as possible. And so I'll come in and I'll plug in numbers, you know, some of them are just my best guess at this point, and I'll need to talk with department heads and other people to get better refined figures as we go. So I'm just going to go over these real quick. I don't know, this program doesn't allow me to zoom in, so hopefully you can see. The general property tax, I'm projecting, you know, some new growth. So I went from about 4.52 million to 4.65 million. I'll probably work with Chris Kaufman to refine that more, but that's, you know, kind of tracking with the average new growth that we've seen in the property tax. No property tax increase proposed, and so we're not going to see much difference. Then we've got something a little more. Various other categories of property tax. We're not gonna go over that in detail right now, but we've got miscellaneous taxes, fee and lieu, which is mostly the tax that comes from registering vehicles and personal property, redemption from prior years, basically back taxes. Here's where we have coming up here. in the
Chris,
general
could you adjust the verse? Yeah, I was wanting to be able to see that column. Thanks. You just didn't.
So I haven't, I've started to plug in some figures.
But if you
This-
can
this
also show the
green-
2022 budget, that would have. I'm just
It's
trying to
just
get an
that
idea of the relative size of these different taxes. So.
Yeah, the Zoom participant window is in my way. I'm just trying to also
Yeah, sorry.
run the meeting and see what I'm doing at the same time. So here we've got my projection for year end sales and use taxes. These are the two general sales taxes that come in. And so these are projections, based on what I just showed you, reprojecting through the end of the year using the average of May and June relative to the trend to project out the remainder of the 6 months of the year. And if I do that, using the May and June as a sort of a harbinger of what's to come for the remainder of the year, then we come up with these figures. And they're actually pretty close to where we started off with. They're not really that much different. One's down a little bit, down about 25, 30,000. The other is up a little bit, but more or less really kind of haven't changed. The projection and the budget, more or less the same. And what that means is that they're going to end up being very close to 0% growth relative to 2021. Because the budget was based on our end of year projection for 2021 with 0% growth. We didn't factor in any growth in our revenue projections for 2022. So, I think that we're going to close the year pretty much dead even with 2021 for these two taxes, which is good, I think, because 2021 is a very strong year, and trying to top 2021 would be tough. So it's good that we're meeting it in these two. The question is, do we want to project growth out at all for 2022? It's a discussion topic. Personally, kind of leaning toward not, just to stay conservative and to be careful. I don't know. What do y'all think?
I think staying conservative.
I think, yeah, it's better to come out ahead than not.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how it is right now that I've plugged in, just 0% growth in 2022 relative to, or 2023 relative to 2022. And we can revise these as we go. And obviously, as we get closer to the end of the year, my projection for 2022 is going to become more and more accurate. Right now, we're missing 6 months. So there's a lot that could happen still, but those are my projections. Then the rest of these are just kind of placeholder figures for assessing and collecting property taxes, penalty and interest, et cetera. And I'll work with Chris Coffin to revise those, but those are going to be pretty dang close already. Then we'll move on to some of these others, just kind of breeze through some of these things. Some of them may change a little bit as I work with departments that collect these fees. This is our business license, planning and zoning, building permit, marriage license, animal license, et cetera. I mostly just use tracking or plugging these numbers in relative to the prior year and kind of getting a feel based on the prior year mostly, and maybe a little bit before that. But they're tracking, generally as we would expect, nothing really too surprising in these figures to me. Intergovernmental is kind of a big mixing pot of a lot of different funding sources, but there's some significant things to talk about in here and that are going to be kind of stressful. I'm not going to hit every one of these things, but some of the broader ones, you know, we've got our federal pill payment, which is fairly important revenue stream for us. It grows a little bit, so I just projected it's like a 2% growth, I think, you know, that we see on average, so I plugged that in. One of the big issues, you know, is that some of the grants that we've had for the last couple of years are going away. I do think we might get a new airport grant that could help, but this airport grant that's plugged in right now, we had 531,000 left and we've spent 473. So I don't know if we'll have anything left by the end of the year, but that grant's been supplementing our airport operations. And so we haven't had to use general fund money to fund the airport for the last couple of years. I need to talk with Tammy to see if we're going to have, you know, additional assistance moving into the future, but that particular grant I think is going to be mostly spent. We've got some of these other things, Council on Aging is a contract with the Grant Center, transfer from Sam Flats to cover some of the general fund expenses from search and rescue out of Sam Flats. HAZMAT grant, which emergency manager usually takes care of. We're kind of somewhat variable. I'll refine that a little bit when we work through the emergency management budget. The liquor allotment is kind of a beer tax money that comes in. It's a little bit variable. It's came in a little higher than I expected last year, but it tends to be around 22,000. This Department of Motor Vehicles is our contract with the state for doing the motor vehicle licensing and registration. And as you can see, it's not much money. It's cost us a lot more to provide that service than what we get from the state.
Barely cover a salary.
Yeah, it's like maybe a part-time, very part-time position.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I talked with Deputy Assessor about it, you know, if we complain to the state about it, they can say, well, if you decide not to do it, then you guys just won't have any place to register your vehicles in Grant County. You have to drive to a whole other county to do it because they're not going to increase it. So we just kind of eat it. We take what we can get. But, you know, that service, even though it's not a county obligation, we take it on with minimal compensation. Then here we've got these two. This OSTA restaurant tax is the contribution from the restaurant car rental taxes to the general fund to cover those Spanish Trail Arenas expenses. I dropped it down somewhat. Generally I don't plug these numbers in until near the end. We'll figure out, get a good assessment for the taxes that we're going to bring in and then dole that out. Right now, I'm just reducing it because I think that the TRCC taxes might be down a little bit. We'll see, maybe not. But right now, just to be conservative, I dropped those down a little bit. But oftentimes I want to make the true allocation until near the end of this process. The restaurant or the rec district contribution, normally 75,000. You know what they're thinking about for 2023, Angie?
No, they're waiting to find out what they're gonna get.
It'll probably be close to the same.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I just got 75 plugged in, but I usually plug in whatever it is they decide to approve in their board meeting. And that's compensation for our Oyster project. And then City of Moab dispatch services, the way that, at least at this point, that the city pays for dispatch that we provide for their police department is that they pay the salary of the dispatch supervisor and benefits. And so this goes up a little bit every year. It was $142,845 in 2021. So I bumped the budget up, to be a little bit higher than that, to cover any potential COLAs, et cetera. Might need to go a little higher, I'm not sure. And then search and rescue, this is the transient room tax contribution to search and rescue, 300,000, which, covers a fair bit of their costs, maybe not the entire cost of search and rescue, but most of it. Then we've got our contribution to law enforcement from the transient room tax. And again, it's kind of a placeholder value at this point when we get, more refined figures and figure out, what contributions we're going to make to solid waste and the museum, et cetera, to be refined a little better. But I did drop it down from about 5 million to 4.5 million, to just in anticipation of decreased TRT collection. I think that if you do the math, I'm projecting a total TRT decrease in 2022 relative to the budget of about 850,000, which equates to about 530,000 less for the general fund, the mitigation side, because it's a 67 or 63, 37% split. So dropping that, roughly by that amount, I think, it's going to be close. Then we've got another restaurant car rental tax contribution to the Grant Center. We budgeted 717,000 for 2022. I dropped it down to 650 for 2023. Again, I'm going to refine these. They're going to drop a little bit, but like I said, generally don't try to nail it until we get closer to the end of the year. Otherwise, I just end up revising it over and over and over again. So kind of plug in a placeholder value in the beginning and then wait until our projections get a little more clear and then really nail it down near the end of the process. Expense reimbursement. This is generally associated with contracts that we have with various entities, mostly the city, but it varies quite a bit. This is a placeholder value. I generally try to add up, all the different elements of expense reimbursement that could be at play. It's a little bit of a junk drawer. Some things come in that are not expected, and so it's a little bit variable. Here's the big kicker that we're going to have to live with moving forward. For the last couple of years, we had ARPA money, $947,000 in 2021 and 2022. That's going away. And there's nothing coming in to replace it. So, if you remember in 2021, I kind of warned that we got to be careful moving forward with our budgeting because we've got these big grants that are not going to last forever. And so that's a little concerning to me, that growth in taxes hasn't been great. And we're losing these big grants because I was anticipating when we got these grants that we continue to grow generally in our sales taxes, and it's a little flattish. And so it's concerning to me that now we're losing maybe up to $1.5 million of revenue without anything coming in to replace it. So we'll see how that shakes out. But it is a little concerning. That's the end of the intergovernmental, some of this other stuff. Charges for services. This is, quite a wide variety of things. Administrative fees are mostly made up of charges to other funds for services provided by the general fund. So that'd be like HR, payroll, all the administrative stuff for like SAMPLATS, economic development, B-Road, all the different funds that get services from the general fund. We got clerk's fees, recorder's fees, airport fees, all that stuff. I'm not going to really go over every single one of them because most of these are going to be revised as we go. Like when we get the airport budget in here, then we'll refine these airport fees, and same with a lot of this other stuff. Felony probation and state jail housing contracts going to be refined when we get to the sheriff's budget. Same with movie support. I did, bump up the sheriff's movie support revenue line item because of the. I know that they're going to get a lot of requests for security from the Horizon project, so I went ahead and bumped that up. The state inmate revenue, I'm keeping relatively the same right now, but Shan kind of indicated that it might be a little more than normal based on what he knows. Fines and forfeitures are generally, money that we bring in from justice court. So we've got just the general justice court fines. Last year didn't come in where I projected, about 15,000 less. So I just went ahead and plugged that in where it was in 2021. I'll talk with Dana Lee and see if she feels like that's accurate. Double check all these things with Dana Lee. But these are, more or less, this 2023 figures are derived from the end of year 2021 figures for the most part. And moving on to miscellaneous. Again, a lot of this stuff's just best guesses at this point and will be revised. Got interest, another airport fee, rent and concessions. This is, it includes things like mosquito abatement district and a variety of things, MIC, et cetera. It's not much. Then the district court leases, part of the courthouse, obviously, that's 160,000 a year that they pay us. Star Hall rent hasn't been much, hasn't even really crossed $1,000 in a while. So I just kind of plugged in 1,000. Airport leases have been going up quite a bit. They didn't hit exactly where I thought they would in 2021. We were kind of thinking that it would be about 295. Maybe it will be this year. We'll see. But I went a little conservative there. I'll work with Tammy to refine that. I got the Civic Center, the Grand Center, basically. Actually got quite a bit of rentals so far this year. We brought in 5,400, which is 10 times the amount we brought in for 2021. So I just kind of split that a little bit, bumped it up to 3,000 for 2023. We'll see, it could be more than that. And here's Angie's stall rent. We had hit almost 53,000 in 2021, which I plugged in. What do you think? Any opinion on that?
It should be about the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I've got it. Then arena rent.
That's going to depend on
Yeah.
what events are allowed to happen.
Well, hopefully we have a decent process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is good, Christmas.
Anyway, I mean, I did plug in a tiny bit of growth from 2021, about a couple thousand. We'll see. I think, we don't need to worry about that one too much. It's pretty close. Miscellaneous revenue, again, this is kind of like when we have revenue that comes in that we weren't expecting, and it's not substantive enough to create a new account for. So, it's anyone's guess what that's going to end up being. I don't generally put much in. 10,000 is what I've got. Then we've got another airport related fee, the landing fees. Then we've got the wastewater pond fee, which has actually gone up quite a bit, surprisingly. I did plug in 5,000. We ended up with 5,600 in 2021, and it was only 1,300 the year before that. And then for 2022, we're already up to 8,700. So there must be something going on that's a lot more activity, oil and gas activity or something. Still not as, a huge amount. I know in the heyday of that thing, we were bringing in over 100,000 a year. So, it's still not really much to worry about. Sell fixed assets. This is mostly going to be selling off our old vehicles as we replace them with enterprise fleet vehicles. We didn't really budget anything for this year, but we've already sold $66,000 worth of vehicles. And so I plugged in, a nominal figure for next year, 30,000. And, I'll amend this as we go for 2022. Insurance claim payment, that's highly unpredictable. It hasn't been up 26,000 in the last few years, but in the past, that's been the average for the payout that we get from the insurance company for any claim that we make.
We'll probably have a big one for the arena this year.
Yeah, so it kind of depends what happens, you know.
Yeah.
It could be, you know, anywhere from nothing to a lot. You know, it depends on what kind of catastrophes befall us that are covered by insurance. And then this other fund transfer right here, the 139, 113, you know, that's a transfer of that CARES Act grant for that, for the airport debt. But I don't know if we're gonna have access to another grant like that to cover airport debt or not. So at this point, I've got it zeroed out. I'll have to work with Tammy to see if we're gonna get another grant that can cover that or not. Normally, when we don't have a grant, we pay for the airport debt out of the TRCC, the restaurant and car rental taxes. We suspended that the last couple of years because we had CARES Act grant to cover it instead. So when we do resume, you know, normal situation, what that's going to mean is that, you know, the airport debt will come out of TRCC, which means less TRCC to go to OSTA and the grant center. Okay, and then this last department is contribution. So this is where if we have to pull money out of the fund balance to balance the budget, basically we're pulling money out of our savings in order to make ends meet. This is where we would plug that in. It's possible that we might have to use that this year. We haven't for the last couple of years, but it's possible that we might have to budget to take money out of the bank to make ends meet. We'll see, but might happen. So that's it for the general fund. Does anybody have any questions about general fund before you move on to the other funds?
Yeah, I had a question. So just if I could make a really rough summary of what you said, we think our combined property tax, sales tax revenues are going to be kind of flat compared to last year. Ditto for other revenues, but this ARPA grant is going away, and that's, you know, more than $1 million. Over the past few years, have we been like putting money into capital improvement funds or just into our fund balance? I mean, or have?
Okay. So we have.
Okay. So it's not going to mean we're going to have to cut. We don't necessarily have to cut $1 million out of by, you know, laying people off. We just might be funding some of these other things more slowly. That's one option.
Yeah, I think we'll see when we get there, but I do think that we're going to be in a situation where we will have to pull money, you know, out of the fund balance to meet the basic operating budget, or, you know, propose to. It's not always the case that we do end up in reality doing that. Oftentimes because there's contingency within the budget that's kind of built in, and you say, all right, we're projecting to have to pull 800,000 out of the fund balance, and then we oftentimes end up not doing it because we have $800,000 of contingency in the budget.
Okay.
But our fund balance, we did transfer this year 3.5 million of our general fund balance into capital projects.
Okay.
That just to make sure that we're not going to be out of compliance. We can only keep 65% of our annual revenues in the rainy day fund, so to speak, the general fund balance. But we can keep as much money as we want in capital projects, as long as it's earmarked or designated for, you know, some capital purpose. And so
Okay. So another way.
Yeah. So there's, you know, we can always pull that money back out too. We can say, all right, we send it over to capital projects, but now we need it for operations, and we can pull it back in. It's not stuck in capital projects, but it is, you know, what I was proposing to use, like, for instance, to purchase the Interact Clubhouse and any other space that we might want to purchase this year. And so we are probably going to end up purchasing the Interact Clubhouse this year. I'm not exactly sure how much that's going to cost yet. But and then, you know, there's other options also for space if we wanted to pursue it. We'll see. But like I said, we can pull that money back into the fund balance, the operating fund balance, if we have to. And I think, you know, it probably wouldn't be the end of the world if we lived off our fund balance a little bit for the next couple of years and just try to keep expenses relatively the same.
with the anticipation that, we'll see some growth in revenue.
Okay, thanks.
But I was expecting, a little better revenue growth than what we're seeing. And was hoping, for that just relative to these grants going away, these big grants going away. All right, so one of the other sort of taxes, I guess you could call it, is that there's a surcharge or a tax on your phone bill that everybody pays that can be used for the provision of emergency services or dispatch, and so that's how we use it. Fund 17 is where that money comes in, projecting about 155,000, which is close to what we got in 2021. And this fund helps offset the expenses related to our dispatch and pays part of the salary for emergency management. Anybody have any questions on that before I go to the next fund? Okay. Next up, next major revenue streams are in Fund 21, which is our Roads and Bridges Fund, where the roads department lives. The two main funding sources are the optional sales tax, the transportation taxes that we talked about earlier. So, I'm projecting that we'll bring in 1,038,000, almost 39,000, which is a little bit less than we originally projected. So a slight decrease, but still, not bad, pretty close to where we were, a little bit less. However, I do think that the B road allocation, which is partially calculated on gas cells, and so when the price of gas goes up, usually we see an increase in B road allocation. So I did bump that up, a fair bit to take that into account. It may even be more than this. I think that in 2021 we almost hit 3 million. So we may actually, with the big jump in gas prices, we may even get above 3 million. So whatever offset, whatever we've lost in transportation sales tax, we're probably going to gain even more in the B road allocation. That's my projection.
So Chris, I had a question about the naming of the sales taxes. In the first charts you showed, I thought there was both a transportation sales tax and a county option tax. So which of those are we looking at here on this thing? Is it the transportation?
Transportation. So we did pass the transportation sales tax. I don't know, it shows up as two different allocations. It comes in two parts. And I don't really understand that. I guess I could get clarification from the tax commission why it comes in two different payments. Because we just passed, as far as I can tell, it's just one tax, but I don't know, it comes in two different allocations. And so I sum those together to get this figure.
I see.
What we call the county option in my other spreadsheet is the 0.25% optional sales tax that all counties can institute just by passing a resolution. They don't have to go to the voters or anything. It's just, and I think all of them do it.
Okay, but that goes to the general fund?
Yeah, for the general fund.
Okay, and so the thing that says county optional sales tax, that's not that 0.25%.
It is a 0.25%, but
Okay,
it's
not the same.
this one. It's not this one.
Got it, okay.
And the B road allocations, what can that money be spent on?
Anything having to do with road projects or road maintenance. So, I mean, we can spend it, on some stormwater as long as it's associated with the road. And we do.
To prevent a road from being.
Yeah, so if it's like a culvert underneath the road or anything like that, that's, within the road right of way. And we do have a lot of stormwater infrastructure in road right of way. So we use B road money on that.
So Chris, last year, and I forget the details, but there was a discussion with Bill about, just how much we could stretch the funding guidelines to fund drainage projects. And I think the conclusion was not very much. But did that does that apply equally to this B road allocation and the transportation sales tax, or do they have different rules for how they're spent?
The transportation sales tax is a little more broad because it allows us to use the money on trails and active transportation,
Okay,
including road projects. B road money can't be used for active transportation, as far as I know. And so the part of this optional transportation tax part of it goes to road projects and part of it goes to GTAT, Grant County Active Transportation and Trails. So a big chunk of this money gets transferred over to a different fund and funds active transportation, paved path maintenance, all that stuff. And I usually have to ask Bill to like cut some of his budget so that I can have some money to send over to GCAT.
Okay.
But we've been able to.
I'm just thinking in terms of funding draining projects. And what I've assumed in the past is that has to be general fund money or mineral lease monies that we fund go through the
Yeah,
special services.
I'll have to look at the statute on this transportation sales tax, but I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't cover non-road associated stormwater. I mean, it's just an assumption at this point. I guess I have to verify it.
Okay. But I guess there's a sub question because, there's maybe some subjectivity into, controlling, if you've got a detention pond, it's 500 yards above a road, is that, helping the road out or not? And I think for the B road money, they were pretty strict that it had to be within the right of way or something like that. I'm just wondering if this other funding source is more flexible.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, it does bring up another question that will have to be answered eventually, which is, do we have enough money to make a contribution to the stormwater mitigation fund? We have been, contributing 400,000 per year, which is the seed money we've used for matches. We got our grant and low interest loan from the CIB using that money before, and then we're also going to have to use it to make our match for the BRIC grant from FEMA and the NRCS work. Both of those also come with a match contribution. So we're going to spend most of what we have in our stormwater fund on those three things. And if, I don't know if we're going to have money to contribute to it or not. That's a question for later. But yeah, I can do a little more research on the statute for this optional transportation sales tax. One of the things that was a component of passing the optional transportation tax was that you're not allowed to decrease your general fund contribution to B roads. And so we were at 10,000. This is a contribution from the general fund to B roads to cover, that requirement. But it also goes into funding, for the most part, fleet maintenance. The roads department takes care of all the county's vehicles and everybody's fleet stuff. And so, it kind of makes sense that we would move some money over anyway to cover some of these things that aren't B-road eligible. We can't use B-road money, for instance, to take care of OSTA's fleet or anybody's fleet that's not the road department. So that covers that, and that's why that's in there. And that's a transfer from the general fund. All right. Any questions on those two main funding streams? B-road, optional transportation tax. Okay, so the restaurant tax, restaurant and car tax. And then we've made the addition of the OHV tax. I'm actually, based on what I've seen, just kind of projecting out to the end of the year for the restaurant tax, I'm actually showing a slight increase in the restaurant tax compared with what we budgeted. But like I say, that's because the June restaurant taxes came in really super strong.
And the May ones were way low. And so when you kind of average those two out and then project through the rest of the year, this is what I come up with. So again, this might change, but it's actually slightly more than what we budgeted. The car rental taxes though are a bit lower, about 60,000 lower each, you know, based again on the same type of projection process. And then the OHV tax, which we didn't budget for at all, really. I'm projecting, you know, at this point anyway, to collect about 150,000, which I plugged into 2023 as well. So like with the others, again, 2023 is just a flat projection from 2022's projection, 0% growth. And I don't know if, you know, that's gonna be the way it pans out, but it's definitely, you know, the most conservative approach, unless we want to budget for an actual decrease, which is not likely in my opinion, for these taxes anyway. And again, this is, you know, the money that we're gonna tend to use this money for funding Old Spanish Trail Arena, Grant Center, and airport debt when we don't have a grant that covers airport debt. Any questions on those?
So the process of getting that grant, has it already happened or does it?
The airport grant? Maybe. Cassie, you know, was taking care of most of that stuff and then she resigned, so a little bit out of the loop right now.
She went back.
I'll have to check in with Gabe and figure out, and Tammy, and figure out what the status is.
Are they advertising for her position?
I think they hired somebody
They
already.
did hire somebody. Jenny Beth Jones.
But it's gonna take a little
Probably
while
not.
for that person, yeah, to get up to speed. All right, moving on to Fund 23. This is economic development. And the transient, you know, the 37% of the transient room tax goes here. So this is reflecting my projected decrease. We originally budgeted $3,272,000. It's been revised to $2,960,000, so a little bit of a decrease. We are going to go through at least proposed budget amendment. We can shore that up, you know, potentially bump that, keep that at the 3.2 level, but just bring the fund balance in to cover it. And then we've got some other budget amendments which we discussed, won't really go into it right now, but if we keep, you know, again, the projection for year-end 2022 through to 2023, then that's what it's looking like, about 2.96 million. And so this would go toward tourism promotion, the responsible recreation program, trail ambassadors, film commission if we have one, economic diversification. And some other stuff, but this is the economic development side of TRT, which is 37% total. And this other fund, Fund 26, is where the mitigation side goes. Again, we're seeing about a drop of about 530,000, going from 5.571 million to 5.04 million. We have about $280,000 in the fund balance that we can bring in to cover, you know, the budget for 2022. But that's all we have to bring in, and so it's not going to cover the full decrease. So I will have to drop the contributions that TRT makes for law enforcement and possibly search and rescue to make up the difference. You know, drop it another 250,000 or so, which is going to affect the bottom line of the general fund.
But, it's not catastrophic or anything, but definitely decreased the bottom line in the general fund for 2022. Moving into 2023, without a fund balance to work with, we'll have to just, use whatever we end up projecting. Which is this 5.04, 5,040,000 figure. And again, no growth projected for 2023. Any questions on the TRT? As it's sitting right now. The last main revenue category is healthcare sales tax. This is the one that goes to EMS and long-term care center, Canyonlands care center. Well, it goes to the healthcare district, which in turn goes to Canyonlands Care Center and MRH dish payment. So showing, a little bit of a decrease in my projection relative to the budget, going from 3.084 million to 2.967. So a little bit of a drop, a little over 100,000, 120,000. That doesn't affect our bottom line, but it is what the EMS and service district will get a little bit less than projected probably. And it sounds like they want to split it a little differently. What was it, 57?
43.
Yeah. So it's a slight change in their allocation, which I calculated represents about $90,000.
I really think we should go for the 1%.
So that would require,
Well, yeah, probably
quite a campaign.
our voters have been pretty good about approving that stuff lately. So and it wouldn't be that much, just what, maybe 0.5%? 0.5%?
0.5%, yeah. In addition to the sales taxes.
We should have gone for the full point, full amount.
So anyway, that's all the major revenue streams. We do get also revenue for property tax revenue for the library, which is, tracking the same. At some point, we will have to consider a property tax increase for the library. And, they do have a fund balance that they can live off of for a while. But I think they are in negative territory.
They are.
Their expenses are exceeding their budget. And so it might be, I think that we could probably go another year at least. But,
It's getting close.
it's one of those things that you have to kind of decide when you want to do it. And there's political considerations and all kinds of strategy associated with doing property tax increase.
It's a lot harder than the sales tax.
But they are
Something
running,
in the
I think
first,
they're
like,
operationally running in the red. So, that's just because we haven't, they're entirely property tax funded. And property taxes don't go up very much if you don't go through truth and taxation and raise them. But,
Now, would
cost
they
of
have
living-
to, could they go through truth and taxation, or would they have to go through a vote?
No, they wouldn't. You have to go through truth and taxation.
Okay, would we have to, could we do truth and taxation rather than a vote?
Yeah.
Well, that's a little easier. You get slammed some, but their memories are short.
So the rest of these funds, their revenue comes from transfers or grants, like CJC and Family Support Center. We'll cover those revenues when we get to those specific items. And kind of holding off also on dealing with Santa Flats until Andrea gets me her projections. She usually does a pretty good job of projecting her own revenue. So I haven't plugged anything for her yet. Sand Flats is a enterprise fund, we call it,
which means that it's sort of its own little budget. And it's actually required, our agreement with the BLM requires that all the money that's brought in for sand flats has to be spent on sand flats. So enterprise fund also means that they can use cash-based accounting as opposed to modified accrual. There's some other
What does that mean?
differences. Like modified accrual means that if, like for instance, when we get our sales tax money, it's 2 months. It's from 2 months prior. And so we don't really account for that money when we get it. We account for when it was collected for. And that's accrual. And it's the same with expenses. Let's say somebody sends you an invoice that you owe money, and then a month later you pay it. We don't account for the expense when we pay it. We account for it when we got the liability. Cash-based accounting though is different. You just account for the money when it hits the bank.
Okay.
Which makes sense for them because they have, almost daily deposits. Their money comes in on a daily basis. And it also affects how they deal with their capital assets. Like for instance, they actually track depreciation on their capital assets and other things. It's just a little different. It's a more business-oriented way of doing accounting. But it also means, that their money doesn't mix with anybody else's and really can't, according to the contracts and agreements we have with BLM. All right, well, that does it anyway for the main revenue streams that I want to cover today. Have to build the big budget amendment and then get ready for all the district allocations. So I haven't been able to really do much more on the 2023 budget than this.
Well, that's a lot.
So we're done anyway for today, unless there's any future considerations that y'all want to talk about.
Hey, so one future consideration, I think we discovered today it's a little bit awkward it would be nice if we could have appointed the new budget committee members before this meeting. So is there a way, can we just make a note to try to have a meeting in, the summer or something next year so that the new committees, or maybe we won't have any new appointments to make next year, I don't know. But.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, part of it was that by the time that, like the commission's always had noticed the vacancies, but nobody had applied.
Right.
And so we had to make a push to find candidates. But it was after the point in time where we would have been able to get the appointments made before this all started.
Yeah. So if there was just some
part of it is that it's hard. You have to be proactive about getting board members.
Oh, yeah, you have to, all boards.
You can't
Right.
just post it and then hope for the best. Most people, it's just not going to happen.
Except
So,
for planning, people seem to want to be on the planning
Yeah.
board, that tends to go, but other than that, it seems like you're begging.
so this, and like I said, I think next time around, we'll just have to, if we don't have applicants, if there's open positions, we don't have applicants, we'll have to push it out a little earlier.
Yeah, okay, that's all.
And part of it, I think it's just, new staff in the commission admin's office. And so they're still getting up to speed on, how all the boards work and the deadlines associated with them all. I was just kind of expecting that they were paying attention to this, and I don't think they were.
We will.
But
I
anyway,
wasn't, anyway, I can't speak for the others, but I wasn't paying any attention to the board opening and
okay. Anything else before we close the meeting? Okay. All right, I'll adjourn the meeting at 2:22 p.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.